Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Clark Dever. I'm a senior product manager at Think Onward. The star of today's show is Mike Tischer. Michael Tischer is the program manager for Think Onward, where he channels his deep expertise in geology and science, and earth science to drive innovation at the intersection of geoscience and data science. With a PhD in geology and earth science from Columbia University, Michael's academic achievements are matched by his passion for the outdoors. He's an instructor at the Colorado Mountain Club's Wilderness Trekking School, imparting his love for adventure and exploration to eager students. Michael also serves as a dedicated member of the On the Rocks Committee at the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists, contributing to initiatives that bridge geographical science with real-world applications. So with that said, I will add one more thing. Since it is a webinar, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and I will feed them to Mike as we transition between topics. The format for today is 15 or 20 minutes of Mike sharing his expertise on how to stay safe in the wilderness through proper preparation, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. All right, with that, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Clark. Can everybody hear me? I hope that's
good to go.
Audio is on. Okay, thanks. Clark, I think you made me blush with your introduction. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Glad you could join us for this. I know you guys have busy lives, and one of these webinars is probably coming across your desk at least once every other day that you could sign up for. So we very much appreciate it that you take a little bit of your time out of the day and join for this, what I think is a very important topic if you do anything in the outdoors, but especially if you lead field trips. So without further ado, let's get into things. What to expect from this webinar. So if you do safety in the field, you always have a disclaimer. So this is my equivalent of it, the disclaimer for this talk. And this one is about what to expect. So this webinar is neither complete nor even comprehensive. And that, I guess, hopefully makes sense to you guys because it's 15 minutes long. And, understanding and teaching safety in the field or in the outdoors is much larger topic. So what I can give you, though, is pointers and ideas of what you need to do when you go out, either by yourself or with a group, either for fun or commercially. It's kind of all tied together. The second thing, and that's the first learning from this talk that you should get away with, that is, do not take anything I tell you at face value. I might be an expert in outdoor trips, but that does not mean I have all the answers, nor am I right 100% of the time. One of my favorite quotes in that context is from a book called Deep Survival, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why, by Lawrence Gonzalez. He says, the word experienced often refers to someone who's gotten away with doing the wrong thing more frequently than you have. And by that, I mean that if somebody tells you, hey, I've done this 9-mile trip with one bottle of 16-ounce water, and I've done it 10 times and I'm fine, that does not mean you should do the same thing. You always have to go back to what you think is right. If it makes sense to you, appeal to your common sense. Listen to the experts, but don't take everything at face value what they say. If you're uncomfortable, if you have concerns, you need to speak up, and those concerns need to be discussed. It's not the leader is not a king of the leader of a field trip. All right. With that, quick agenda. We're doing a quick introduction. We're doing a quick discussion about what's the safety components in the field. Then we're zooming in on a few topics. One's outdoor first aid, the other one's trip planning, and then finally leadership. And then hopefully we'll have some time for you guys to ask questions. I can stop throughout the talk for a second to see if Clark got any questions to the topic that we just discussed, but you can also ask at the end. All right, so second thing that you need to know when you run a field trip or when you're part of a field trip is, who is that guy who's leading the field trip? You need background information. If you spend 2 weeks going to Denali or going to a remote area to look at geology or just have fun, and you're with a leader, you want to know who that person is, because he might, save you from harm. And honestly, in some cases, the life of you depends on him. So you need to build some trust. So that's what we're going to do here as well with that talk. So I'm from Bavaria, Germany. I live close to the Alps. So since then, I love to do stuff in the outdoors. My geology degree is from Columbia, and I'm currently a project manager. Think onward. But most importantly for this talk is I have quite a bit of field experience. I ran field trips for ExxonMobil. I'm running right now geology field trips for Denver Audubon, the naturalist program in Denver. For the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists, I run and plan field trips for geologists in Colorado. That's where I live, and beyond. And then for the Colorado Mountain Club, as Clark said, I run what's basically hiking 101 class, but I also organize field trips and geology field trips as well. So the first thing you need to do is when you go out, you need to know who's in your group, you need to know your leader, and most importantly, you need to know who you are. That means you need to know what you're capable of doing, right? And what you would enjoy. Very, very important. All right, a couple of tidbits before we really dive into the meat of the thing. Maybe you know those, maybe you don't. Statistically, the car ride to and from the trailhead or field site can be more dangerous than the hike or any activity at the field site. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I personally, when I do field trips, the most stressful for me are field trips where we have a car caravan and go from one road outcrop to another outcrop, because I have to worry about how to drive 20 miles on the interstate with 5 cars or even more sometimes when you have an organized field trip, because there's things on the road that I just can't control. I can't control any of the other drivers, so that's always makes me squeezy. So anyway, so that is really a big difference. If you just hike in the wilderness, the car ride to the trailhead is probably the most dangerous one for you. Once you're at the trail, you're fine. Most hikers get lost on the trail. That might sound weird to you, but what that really is that if somebody hikes off trail and they know they hike off trail, they usually are really good at planning ahead. They're planning the routes, they're looking at topo maps. A lot of people, if they hike in parks where there's a trail system, they just say, well, I look at the map at the trailhead and then I'm on a trail, so I know where to go. That works until you step off the trail, to take a picture, look at a rock, look at flowers, and then you could go back on the trail and you can't remember anymore, do you have to go left or right? You might think that you had to go right, but you will find out a mile down the trail that this was actually the wrong direction. That's when people get turned around. That's when people actually get lost. You take the wrong fork, that sort of thing. So be aware of that. It's somewhat counterintuitive, but statistics says you get lost more often while you're on a trail than when you were actually off a trail. And then finally, altitude sickness can start as low as 8,000 feet. Even if you are in good shape. I've got people come into Denver from Florida, from other places, and they want to go into the mountains and get sick. And altitude sickness manifests itself in the early stages with a headache and nausea. And they don't know why, because they say, well, I run 10 miles every day in Florida. It has nothing to do with your physical activity. It's something that's specific to you. You can't train it away. If you get altitude sickness, you can't just get rid of it by doing most sports. So be aware of that. All right. Field safety can be divvied up in a whole bunch of components. I use this pyramid, and there's many ways to do this, and you've probably seen other ones online. But for me, the field safety consists of common sense, people and environments, organization and planning, and leadership. Common sense is something that everybody should have, but you can't take for granted. For me, it's common sense not to go up to a moose and try to touch it, because moose are really dangerous. Other people who've never encountered that or have never seen that this is a dangerous activity, they might say, well, common sense is like this, is like a horse. I can just go up and say hi. So don't assume that everybody has the same type of common sense or that everybody has common sense that you expect them to have. If you send geologists out in the field and they see a rock, their common sense might go out and they go up a scree slope that they shouldn't, or they cross a road that without looking that they shouldn't. So always prepare for the worst, I guess. And don't assume that people know what they need to do. You always have to tell them. People and environments. You can't control environments. You cannot control people, but you can know your people and you can know your environments. That's like the medical background story. It's like in the environment space, it's like the weather or the trail conditions. All that stuff can be researched, and I'll show you more about that later. Organize and plan. It's very important to do that. You can't just wake up and say, well, I'm going to have a trip today. I'm just going to wing it. And then very important also leadership. And that starts with that planning phase. It starts with engaging with your people. It starts to make sure that everybody knows what's going on, what the plan is, and listen to your folks and look at the environment and make sure that you understand what's going on. All right, when we go into detail in all of these. All right, 10 essentials. 10 essentials, some of you might have heard this. Clark, do you want to run the quiz here, or do you just want me to show the 10 essentials?
Oh, there we go. Can
Okay.
you give us one essential that you think you should bring into the field with you? We'll keep this
All right,
open for
let's see what people say.
We've got about 30% participation. We can crack 50, guys. I know it. Let's go. Let's go, team. 46%. One more person.
I don't see the answers, Clark, so you have to read those to me.
Yeah, we're waiting. All right, 46. That's it. I'm gonna end the poll. Let's see, view details. All right, we have everyone, literally everyone answered water. So,
Nice.
so I hope that water is on the list. Good answer, though. Good answer.
Okay, cool. So let me show you. Oops, move back here. All right, here are the 10 essentials. You can find those online. Wikipedia entries about every mountain club has those online. They might vary slightly with how they're phrased, or there might be one item on there and another one got dropped. There might be some additional essential items, but that's in general, that's what it is. Now, water is a good one. However, the key here is extra water. That is your 10 essentials. Yes, water is essentials when you go on the trip. Extra water is the part that's the part of the 10 essentials. Why is that? When I first hiked, I was really happy when I came back to the trailhead after the hike and looked at my water and said, I used up all my water, so I didn't carry any extra baggage. Until I found out that, well, that extra water that's listed here is really for if something happens. You twist your ankle, you take 3 or 4 hours longer to go back to the trailhead, you go into a storm, you have to wait it out. That's where that extra water comes in, right? Because now all of a sudden you're out much longer than you thought you would, and you need that extra water. So you should feel happy if you bring back like a liter of water back to your trailhead, because that is your extra water. That is what you should have in the case of an emergency. The same thing with extra nutrition and the same thing with extra clothing. So most of those are for emergencies only. Sun protection is one that it's not for emergencies only. Use sun protection when you're out there. Okay, one thing I want to say about first aid, and that's, you've seen the picture here. So this is one that from a first aid kit, and I put that in quotes, from Johnson & Johnson that you can get online. It has whopping 12 items in it. It's probably like 6 bandages and a gauze strap and maybe an Advil. That is not what your first aid supply should look like. It should look like more what I have here on the right. That is my first aid kit. You can see it. I have it in my hand there. You can see how big it is. It's not that heavy. It's a little bit bulky, but it's not that heavy. I carry that with me all the time. All your participants on your trips should have a first aid kit with them. If you're a trip leader, if you're a commercial trip leader, you should also have a group first aid kit with you, just in case. All of that's listed here, you shouldn't just have it, you should also know how to use it. If you have a specific fire starter that you want to try it out at home before you go into the wilderness. If you try it for the first time when it's storming and raining and you don't know how it works, or if it works, then that's the wrong time, it's too late. Try it at home, rescue beacons, things like that. Try that at home, read through the manual, GPS units, all that stuff. You need to try and see if it works. So we're not gonna take this first aid with us. Okay, first aid training, there's a lot of information on there that is just for your reference because we can share those slides later. And the key point here is it's first aid in the field basically is different than when you take a first aid class with the Red Cross in an urban environment. It's what to do when help is delayed. You might have to wait an hour, you might have to wait a day before somebody comes in and helps you. So you need to stabilize the patient and make the patient comfortable, either yourself or who's hurt. And the best way to do that is by taking a class which is called Wilderness First Aid. It's about 16 to 18 hours, and it teaches you everything that you need to know of how to do that. Now, it will not teach you how to, stitch up somebody or set bones. That is not the purpose of Wilderness First Aid. You're just stabilizing the patients until the rescue comes in. All right. The other thing I wanted to point out with first aid, it's always good because there's a lot of things to consider when you do first aid in the field, especially if you're the leader and you're in a stressful situation. If somebody gets hurt and bleeding, you don't have time to whip out your phone and say, well, let me look this up, how I best solve this. So there's a whole procedure you can go through. And we have at the Colorado Mountain Club, we have a card that every trip leader has in their backpack as a reminder. It's a reference card. You should look at that every time before you go on a trip, and occasionally just to remind yourself. And it has all this stuff on here that, what's the scene like, what's the injury, what, how to organize the first aid. Again, this is for your reference, and we can send you the link to this because that is public. I want to point out the best book that I found on Wilderness First Aid. You can see here as a reference at the bottom. This is really good. It goes through all the different scenarios. If you have somebody with heat stroke, if you have somebody who has broken a leg, what to do. Okay. All right, let's go to any questions about first aid, or should we just wait until the end? I don't know, Clark, if anything came in.
We don't have any questions at this time, so.
Okay, cool. Let's just wait all the way at the end and see if people have questions. Okay, trip planning. Trip planning is very important. You have to understand what your hazards are, like wildlife, like a cliff, like an interstate on the side of where you look at rocks, for instance. And then you have to associate a risk with it. So a hazard is always there. Could be the weather. That's something most of the time you can't control. Risk is, with the hazard in place, how likely is it that something happens? How likely is it that I get hit by lightning? How likely is it that I slip on a wet surface? So we use this form to assess what is the hazard, if it's, and what the probability is that the likelihood that something can happen when you're in the field. And that depends on where you go and what your trip is, right? But we go through this every time. Some of this, if you go by yourself, you go through that probably only in your head. If you do this for a group, especially if you do it commercially, you want to formalize that. You want to use that form to do this. All right. Again, we'll share that form with you. The other thing you want to think about is, well, where I'm actually going and how does that site look? Ideally, if you have the time, you want to go there before your trip with a group, right? You want to scout out the locations that you're going to. If you can't, look it up online. Other people might have posted something about what the conditions are at that site. What you need to know is when you go somewhere is, well, where's my next hospital, right? Do I have cell phone service? What's a no-go situation? If there's heavy rain and you're in a flood-prone area, you might not want to go to a site because you might have to deal with flash flood conditions. So all that stuff, again, we have a form for that because nobody can remember all of this in their head, but this kind of captures what you would have to think about. The Bible, in terms of field safety, is listed down here. It's a book called Field Safety in Uncontrolled Environments by Oliveri and Bohax from 2005. If you're really invested into this field trip stuff and you run trips for others, even if it's like nonprofits or for yourself, that would be a good one to get. I can highly recommend that. It's not too expensive. It's like $30 or so. It's, as I said, it's the Bible in this sense. Okay, finally, leadership. Rule number one, it's not a democracy when you're out in the field. If you have one or two people who say, I don't want to go over here, or I'm done, I don't want to go the extra 4 miles to the next side, and 10 other people say, oh yes, let's do it, you as a leader need to say, no, we can't, because you cannot risk the lives of one or two people because 10 other people want to go somewhere that those guys don't. So it's not a democracy. You don't put things up to a vote. You make the decision. You look at the folks that don't want to go there. If they already look like they're very exhausted, it's an easy decision. If you have enough leaders with you or people that organize the trip, you might be able to split up. But in general, if that happens on my field trips, we will just turn around because, safety first. You're the decision maker, you're the risk manager, and you're the group facilitator. So in that role, you have a whole bunch of leadership characteristics that you should have. You should be self-confident. You should be good with planning and organizing skills. You should be competent in the required field skills. So if you go on a 15-mile hikes, but you have never done a hike longer than 5 miles, now that might not be the one to do. You might want to check out if you're actually able to do the 15 miles by yourself. So this all sounds a little bit overwhelming. Some of the stuff you guys do, even if you go by yourself already, you manage risk. You go out on your private hike and say, well, what's the weather forecast for today for this area? You do this anyway, but when you do trips, you need to formalize all of this a little bit more and keep records. Last but not least, leave no trace. Very important to me. As a trip leader, you need to make sure that nobody trashes the environment, throws their banana peels and stuff into the wilderness, and also doesn't take anything when they need to. I know it's very tempting. I'm a geologist too. I like to pick up a rock everywhere I can. But if you're, let's say, in a national park where you cannot pick up rocks and take with you, just leave them. That's kind of one of my pet peeves. So leave no trace, always important here. Finally, last slide, I think. Follow-ups. After the trip, you should follow up. Either you might go and have dinner together, like it's shown here on the right, and you can query the participants, what they liked and didn't like about the hike, what they think about we could do better. You can send out a survey. You should probably do an internal retro with the folks who organized the trip with you. Make some notes, take some notes, and very important also if you used up some of your first aid, or if you bring a GPS with batteries, restock these items and recharge them too for your next trip, and then you're better prepared next time. And with that, I'll leave it for a couple of questions. Sorry, we're a little bit longer.
That was beautiful, Mike. Thank you very much. I will leave the questions open, but I have a couple prepared myself to ask you. So as we're waiting for some audience questions to come in, do you recommend taking like a iterative approach or like scaling up your engagements? It seems like a lot of these photos, there's 30 people in them. Is that where you started?
No, no. I mean, you can scale up in two different ways, right? You scale up by the scale of the trip. So for instance, let's take Denver, where I live as an example. I would start out with trips that are along the Front Range, maybe even in designated parks where I know I'm still within cell phone range. I have other people there. I'm not the only one there with a group. And I don't have to drive for half a day to get there, right? And then you can go into the mountains, go in higher and more remote areas. The other way to scale up is, of course, that you tag along with a leader, right? That's one way I started. In the mountain club, you don't just say, "Hey, I want to be a trip leader." You have to go through training that requires multiple trips with a trip leader, where you take on more and more responsibility. There's a leadership class that you have to take. And then you can get certified. And that should be the same process for everyone, wherever you are, if it's a mountain club or, a commercial outfit. Wilderness first aid training, all that stuff needs to be in place first. So yeah, scaling is very important. You don't just throw yourself into a trip to, as I said earlier, Denali as your first trip.
So, a kind of a follow-up question on
Mhm.
that. Different ecosystems, different latitudes have different risks that may not be apparent out of the gate. Are there any of, I know myself, I'll speak, out of my own failures. Well, close calls, we'll say. One time I was in Arizona and I realized that the sun was about to go behind the mountain range, and I knew that we'd have a pretty severe temperature drop after that point because we were in a desert climate, right? But a lot of people get caught out by that. And by the time I got back to my tent, we had 20-mile-an-hour winds. I couldn't start a fire, and the temperature dropped below freezing, and it had been 105 during the day. So that was like one of those close calls. If I had been stuck out on the trail still because I hadn't recognized that danger condition, I would have been in trouble. Are there any other environmental cues that are kind of like common traps for inexperienced people in a locale that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, that what you describe is very common, right? Especially in the mountains and in desert environments, the temperature swing and weather coming in can be really extreme. Um, and you can mitigate that by in the mountains. You would, if you go up high, you would always hike very early in the morning, and the rule of thumb is that you're actually done by noon, because that's usually when the storms come in, at least in the summertime, right? The other way to mitigate that is, of course, by bringing enough clothes. That sounds stupid, still sounds stupid to me. If I bring like it's August, I bring a puffy jacket because I'm up there at 12,000 feet, but it's cold in the morning when I start. And in case something happens and I would have to stay overnight, I need that puffy jacket, right? Because it gets really, really, really cold. So that's one other thing when you plan on this. Always not just look at the weather at the time you're there, but the next day as well, in case you're stuck. So how low can it go in the afternoon, right? So back to your point, Clark. There, I mean the weather is obviously one thing that you over time hopefully get a feel for. When clouds appear, there's different types of clouds. One are storm clouds, others are just benign clouds, right? Once you see that, your alarm bells can go off when you see the storm clouds, and then you can think about, okay, if it rains here a lot in a desert environment, there's flush flood danger. Do I really want to be here? Maybe I should turn around. Even if it doesn't rain right now, even if it might not rain in an hour, but in an hour, where are you if you continue? You might be 3 hours away from a safe spot, right? So yes, there's different considerations here. And you that's I mean, you can look it up online, but really the way to get a feel for it is by experience, right? And going with other folks who can point stuff out to you. If that there might be wildlife dangers, it might be weather danger, or it might be something else.
So we've got some inputs from the crowd. Carlos says, "Thanks, Mike. Very interesting talk." And they'll use this the next time they go into the field. Stefano mentions trip leaders slash safety watchers are a different role than a field instructor. Someone shouldn't be trying to teach while handling group safety as well. I think that's a very valid point. And then Tracy mentioned, I never thought about the worst case scenario of being stuck overnight. A headlamp might be something also to we should always carry with us. I think that's accurate. I actually carry a headlamp in my personal like backpack that I bring to work. It comes
Yeah,
in handy all the time, both as
yeah,
for lighting, but also as an indicator of where you are. I've been on roads late at night, and having a light source on you makes you much more visible.
yeah. So I want to follow up on Stefano's point because he raises a pretty big point that I haven't really touched on in here. If you do this for an organization or commercially to go on a geology field trip, you usually have a couple of roles um, for the leaders. Basically, you have one at least one person who organizes trips, and then who's on the field trip, and then one person who's actually doing the teaching, right? Who's teaching folks about the geology that they see around them, and brings them up to the rocks. That teacher should not be concerned with the safety issue. That's absolutely right. Um, for that, the people who organize the trip and are on the trip, or dedicated safety watchers, as Stefano said, is the way to go. So they will, for instance, stay close to make sure that nobody, gets too close to a cliff or a road, right? There, they, they don't care about the geology that's taught at the moment. They just look at the group and see that everything is okay. Um, that is in a big setting. If you go out with if I go out with a geology group as part of the Colorado Mountain Club, I don't have that. I'm the only leader, so I have to do both. I have to make sure that I, once we're in a safe spot, I can talk about the geology, but I always also have to look out for the safety, right? To get people safe to that spot first, and make sure that they stay safe in the location we're at. Um, it can, it depends on what environment you're in, but you might have multiple people who divvy up the work. So good point from Stefano.
Wonderful. Well, that appears to conclude our Q&A session. So, Mike, thank you again. Excellent information. If you are an attendee, I'd encourage you to register at thinkonward.com. Start an account on the site if you don't already have one. We'll have more webinars coming up, and then there's always the opportunity to participate in our geoscience and data science related work. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and we appreciate your time today.